Bikers harass Elon Musk in small town. What he does leaves them speechless. The small town air was crisp with the scent of freshly mowed lawns and the faint aroma of baked goods from the local cafe. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other or thought they did. The hum of motorcycles interrupted the idyllic scene, breaking the quiet morning as a group of bikers rumbled down Main Street. Their leather jackets bore patches of skulls and crossed chains, an unmistakable signal that they weren't there for a friendly visit. Elon Musk, dressed in a simple blue shirt and jeans, stood on the corner near a hardware store, casually observing the scene. He had arrived in town under the radar, looking for a quiet spot to think after a hectic week. But his anonymity wasn't meant to last. The bikers slowed their motorcycles as they approached the corner where he stood, their engines rumbling low and menacingly. "Hey, look at this guy," one of the bikers jeered, his voice loud enough to catch the attention of passers-by. He was a burly man with a patchy beard and mirrored sunglasses that reflected Elon's calm expression back at him. "What are you doing, standing there like a lost puppy?" Elon glanced at the man, his face remaining neutral. "Just enjoying the day," he said simply. The leader of the group, a tall man with a shaved head and a smirk that didn't reach his eyes, dismounted his bike. He stepped forward, the heavy boots of his leather riding gear thudding against the pavement. "You lost or something, pal?" he asked, his tone condescending. "No, not at all," Elon replied, his voice steady. "Just passing through." The bikers exchanged glances, their smirks widening as if they had found their entertainment for the day. Around them, a few townsfolk slowed their steps, hesitant but curious to see what would happen next. "Passing through, huh?" the leader said, his voice dripping with mockery. "You don't look like you belong here. This town's not really for outsiders, especially ones like you." Elon tilted his head slightly, his calm gaze unbroken. "And what kind of ones like me would that be?" The question seemed to unsettle the leader for a moment, but he quickly recovered, his smirk widening. "The kind who think they're better than everyone else. You got that look, you know? All smug and full of yourself." Elon remained silent, his expression unchanging. The lack of a reaction seemed to irritate the man, whose smirk began to falter. The other bikers chuckled, their laughter echoing off the quiet storefronts. "Hey, we're talking to you," another biker called out, revving his engine for emphasis. "You deaf or something?" Elon glanced at the man briefly before returning his attention to the leader. "I hear you," he said. "I just don't see the point in responding to insults." The leader took another step closer, his posture aggressive. "You got a smart mouth, don't ya?" he said, his voice low and threatening. "Maybe someone needs to teach you a little respect." By now, a small crowd had begun to gather. Townsfolk watched nervously from a distance, their expressions a mix of concern and apprehension. No one seemed willing to intervene, their gazes flickering between Elon and the bikers like spectators at a standoff. "I respect those who deserve it," Elon said evenly. "But I don't think intimidation earns respect." The leader's face darkened, his smirk vanishing. He took another step forward, now standing just a foot away from Elon. "You think you're pretty tough, don't you?" he snarled. "Think you can just stand there and talk down to me?" "I'm not talking down to anyone," Elon replied. "I'm just standing here. You're the one who approached me." The leader's fists clenched at his sides, and the tension in the air grew thicker. The other bikers revved their engines again, the sound echoing loudly through the street. A woman holding a child across the road flinched, quickly pulling her son closer as the noise grew louder. The leader finally stepped back, his smirk returning as he glanced at his companions. "This guy thinks he's smarter than us," he said, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "Thinks he can just stand there and act all superior. Maybe we should show him how we handle people like that." Another biker, a wiry man with a sneer that seemed permanently etched on his face, spoke up. "Yeah, maybe we should. Teach him a little lesson." Elon's calm expression didn't waver. He didn't move, didn't flinch, even as the bikers began to circle him like vultures. The crowd watching from a distance grew more uneasy, their whispers growing louder. "What's he doing?" one man muttered to his wife. "Why isn't he leaving? Should we call the police?" Another woman asked, clutching her purse tightly. But Elon remained rooted in place, his hands loosely at his sides, his eyes steady as they followed the bikers' movements. He didn't appear afraid. If anything, he looked almost curious, as if studying their behavior. The leader seemed to notice this, and it only fueled his irritation. "You think this is funny?" he demanded, his voice rising. "You think you can just stand there and stare at us?" "I think you're trying very hard to make a point," Elon said calmly. "But I'm not sure what it is." The leader's face flushed with anger, and he took a step forward, pointing a finger at Elon. "The point is, this is our town," he growled. "And we don't take kindly to people like you coming in and acting like you own the place." "I'm not trying to own anything," Elon replied. "I'm just visiting." "Well, maybe you should visit somewhere else," the leader snapped, "before you regret staying here any longer." The threat hung in the air, heavy and unspoken. The crowd watching seemed frozen, unsure of what to do. Some whispered nervously, while others simply stared, their expressions a mix of fear and curiosity. Elon met the leader's gaze, his calm demeanor never faltering. "I don't regret standing here," he said, "and I won't regret staying either." The leader opened his mouth to respond, but something in Elon's tone seemed to stop him. For a moment, the street was silent, save for the low rumble of the bikers' engines. The tension was palpable, hanging like a storm cloud over the scene. And then, slowly, the leader began to laugh. A low, mocking sound that sent a shiver through the crowd. "You've got guts, I'll give you that," he said. "But guts don't mean much when you're outnumbered." He glanced at his companions, who nodded in agreement, their smirks widening. The circle around Elon tightened, the bikers' movements slow and deliberate. The stage was set, the players in position. And Elon Musk, calm and unshaken, stood at the center of it all, waiting to see how far the bikers were willing to go. The tension hung in the air like an oppressive fog as the bikers revved their engines, the noise growing louder and more disorienting. Elon Musk remained rooted in place, his calm expression unshaken by the deliberate intimidation. The leader of the group leaned against his motorcycle, smirking at Elon with an air of triumph, as though he believed he had already won whatever game he thought they were playing. "Still here, huh?" The leader taunted, his voice cutting through the din. "I figured a guy like you would have run off by now. Guess you're either really brave or really stupid." Elon didn't respond, his gaze steady as he watched the bikers. His silence only seemed to agitate the group further, their smirks hardening into sneers. The townsfolk who had gathered to watch the unfolding scene kept their distance, their unease evident in the way they hovered near doorways or ducked behind cars. A few people whispered among themselves, their words barely audible over the roar of the motorcycles. "Who does he think he is?" One woman murmured to her husband. "Why doesn't he just walk away?" "Because they won't let him," the man replied grimly. "Those guys are looking for trouble, and they won't stop until they get it." The leader straightened, his smirk widening as he took a step closer to Elon. "You know, you've got guts standing there all quiet like that," he said. "But guts only get you so far. Maybe you're used to people backing down when you show up, but this isn't Silicon Valley, pal. This is the real world." The other bikers laughed, their voices harsh and mocking. One of them, a wiry man with a scar running down his cheek, gestured at Elon with a gloved hand. "Hey, maybe he doesn't know who he's dealing with," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Should we introduce ourselves?" The leader chuckled darkly. "Good idea," he said. He turned back to Elon, his eyes glinting with malice. "We're the kind of guys who don't take kindly to outsiders coming into our town and acting like they own the place. And you've got that look, like you think you're better than us." "I don't think I'm better than anyone," Elon said evenly, his voice carrying over the noise. "I'm just standing here. You're the ones making a scene." The leader's smirk faltered for a moment, replaced by a flicker of annoyance. "A scene? Huh," he said, his tone turning colder. "You think this is a scene? Oh, buddy, you haven't seen anything yet." He motioned to the other bikers, and they began to circle Elon more tightly, their motorcycles inching closer with each pass. The sound of their engines reverberated off the surrounding buildings, creating an oppressive wall of noise that seemed to close in on him. Still, Elon didn't move, his calm demeanor unwavering. The townsfolk watching from the sidelines grew more anxious, their whispers becoming more urgent. "Someone should call the police," a man said, his voice tight with worry. "This is getting out of hand." "They won't get here in time," another woman replied, shaking her head. "And even if they do, those bikers will be gone before anything happens." Amid the growing tension, one of the bikers, a stocky man with a thick beard and a voice like gravel, revved his engine and shouted, "Hey, big shot, you think your money means anything out here? We don't care who you are or what you've done. Out here, you're just another guy with a target on his back." Another biker chimed in, his tone mocking. "Yeah, what's the matter? Cat got your tongue? Or are you just too scared to say anything?" Elon glanced at the man, his expression unreadable. "I don't see the point in wasting words," he said simply. "You've already decided what you want to think about me." The leader barked a laugh, the sound sharp and grating. "Oh, he's got a mouth on him, doesn't he?" he said, turning to the others. "Thinks he's some kind of philosopher or something." Scarface, the wiry biker, leaned forward on his handlebars, his sneer widening. "Maybe he thinks he's too good to talk to us," he said. "Typical rich guy, always looking down on people like us." "I'm not looking down on anyone," Elon replied calmly, "but I'm also not going to stoop to your level." The leader's smirk vanished completely, his face darkening with anger. "Stoop to our level?" he repeated, his voice low and dangerous. "You've got some nerve, pal. You think you're better than us because you've got money and a fancy name? Out here, that means nothing." Elon's gaze didn't waver. "If it means nothing, then why are you so fixated on it?" The question seemed to catch the leader off guard, his expression flickering with uncertainty before hardening again. He stepped closer, his fists clenching at his sides. "You don't get to talk to me like that," he growled. "You don't get to stand there all high and mighty and act like you're untouchable." "I'm not untouchable," Elon said quietly. "I'm just not afraid of you." The leader's face twisted with rage, and he took another step forward, his body practically vibrating with barely restrained fury. The other bikers exchanged glances, their smirks fading as the tension in the air grew thicker. For a moment, it seemed as though the leader might lash out, his fists trembling at his sides. But before he could make a move, a voice from the crowd called out, cutting through the noise like a knife. "Hey, leave him alone." All heads turned toward the source of the voice, a teenage boy standing near the edge of the crowd, his face pale but determined. He was thin and wiry, his clothes slightly too big for his frame, but his eyes burned with defiance as he stepped forward. The bikers laughed, their derision loud and mocking. "Oh, look at this," Scarface said, his sneer widening. "The kid's got guts. Too bad he doesn't have the brains to go with them." The leader glared at the boy, his anger momentarily redirected. "You've got something to say, kid?" he demanded. "Because I don't think you know what you're getting yourself into." The boy hesitated for a moment, his hands trembling at his sides. But then he straightened, his voice steady as he said, "I know exactly what I'm doing. You're nothing but bullies, and everyone here knows it." The crowd murmured in agreement, their fear beginning to give way to quiet support. The bikers glanced around, their confidence wavering slightly as they realized the tide was beginning to turn. But the leader wasn't ready to back down. He turned his glare back to Elon, his voice dripping with venom as he said, "This isn't over, Musk. Not by a long shot." The tension remained thick, the crowd holding its collective breath as the standoff continued. But Elon didn't move, didn't flinch, his calm presence an unshakable force against the bikers' aggression. The oppressive air of tension refused to lift. The leader of the bikers, his face a mask of barely contained fury, stared down Elon Musk with the intensity of a predator sizing up its prey. Around them, the crowd continued to grow, townsfolk whispering nervously but keeping their distance, unsure whether to intervene or flee. The rumble of the bikers' engines persisted, the sound pulsating through the streets like the heartbeat of something dangerous and uncontrollable. The teenage boy who had spoken up earlier hesitated on the edge of the crowd, his defiant expression now tinged with uncertainty. He seemed to realize that he'd drawn more attention than he bargained for, and as the bikers turned their gazes toward him, he took a small step back, his courage faltering. "Hey, kid," sneered Scarface, the wiry biker who seemed to revel in making others uncomfortable. "You've got a big mouth for someone so small. You sure you want to keep running it?" The boy's lips tightened, his trembling hands betraying his nerves. He glanced at Elon, as though seeking reassurance, but Elon didn't respond immediately. His calm gaze remained fixed on the leader, his posture unyielding as if to say, "This isn't over yet." The leader, perhaps sensing the shift in focus, waved a hand dismissively toward the teenager. "Forget the kid," he growled, his voice low but menacing. "He's not worth the trouble. This guy, though," he pointed a finger at Elon, his smirk returning as his confidence rebuilt itself. "This guy's asking for it." "Yeah," chimed in another biker, a heavy-set man with a leather vest adorned with menacing patches, standing there like he's better than us. "I say we knock him down a peg." Scarface laughed, his sneer widening. "What do you say, boss? Think we should teach him a little lesson? Show him how we do things around here?" The leader's smirk widened, but there was a flicker of hesitation in his eyes. Despite his bravado, he couldn't ignore Elon's unshakable demeanor. It was as though Elon's calmness was a mirror reflecting the bikers' own insecurities back at them, and they didn't like what they saw. "Let's start small," the leader said finally, his tone dripping with mockery. "No need to get our hands dirty just yet." He nodded toward one of the parked motorcycles, a sleek black machine with chrome accents that gleamed in the sunlight. "Let's see how smart you really are, Mr. Big Shot," he said, addressing Elon. "If you're so calm under pressure, why don't you take a little ride with us? See if you can keep up." Elon raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. "And if I say no?" The leader's smirk didn't falter. "Then we'll know you're all talk. And so will everyone else here." The crowd stirred, their whispers growing louder. Some of the townsfolk exchanged worried glances, clearly concerned about where this was heading. The teenage boy, still hovering near the edge of the crowd, clenched his fists, his face pale but resolute. Elon didn't respond immediately. He let the question hang in the air, his silence drawing out the tension like a taut wire. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm but firm. "I don't need to prove anything to you." The leader's smirk twisted into a sneer. "Typical," he said, his tone filled with disdain. "Big words, no action. Just what I expected from a guy like you." One of the bikers, the heavy-set man in the leather vest, took a step closer, his grin wide and menacing. "Maybe we should make it a little easier for him," he said. "Give him something he can't say no to." He reached into the pocket of his vest and pulled out a thick, permanent marker. With exaggerated slowness, he walked over to one of the parked motorcycles and uncapped the marker, the thick black tip glistening ominously. "Let's see if you've got what it takes to defend yourself, Mr. Musk," the man said, his grin widening. "Or if you're just gonna stand there and watch." Before anyone could react, he leaned down and scrawled something across the side of the motorcycle's fuel tank. The crowd craned their necks to see, and a collective gasp rippled through them as the word became clear. "Coward." The heavy-set man straightened, holding the marker up like a trophy. "What's the matter?" he taunted. "Cat got your tongue? Or are you just gonna let that slide?" Elon's expression didn't change. He didn't flinch, didn't react, but the air around him seemed to grow heavier, charged with a quiet intensity that made even the most jaded onlookers hold their breath. The leader, emboldened by his companion's actions, stepped forward again. "What's the matter, Musk?" he said, his tone mocking. "Too scared to do anything? Or maybe you just don't care." "I care," Elon said evenly, his voice cutting through the noise like a knife. "But I'm not here to play your games." The leader laughed, the sound harsh and grating. "Games? You think this is a game? Oh, buddy, you're in for a rude awakening." He turned to the other bikers, his smirk widening as he addressed them. "Looks like Mr. Big Shot needs a little more motivation," he said. "Let's see how much he cares when it's not just about him." The bikers exchanged glances, their grins widening as they caught on to the leader's meaning. One of them, a tall, lanky man with a shaved head, gestured toward the crowd. "What about them?" he said, his voice filled with malice. "Think he'll care if we make things a little more interesting?" The crowd stirred uneasily, their whispers growing louder. A woman clutching a small child pulled him closer, her face pale with fear. The teenage boy who had spoken up earlier stepped forward again, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. "Leave them out of this," Elon said sharply, his voice ringing out across the street. For the first time, there was an edge to his tone, a flicker of steel beneath his calm exterior. The leader turned back to him, his smirk widening. "Oh, now you've got something to say," he said. "What's the matter?" Finally realizing you're not in control here, Elon didn't respond immediately. He took a step forward, his posture calm but commanding, his gaze locked onto the leaders. The crowd fell silent, the tension in the air thick enough to cut with a knife. "You think control comes from intimidation," Elon said quietly, his voice steady. "But real control doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to bully, and it doesn't need to tear others down." The leader's smirk faltered for a moment, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. But he quickly recovered, his sneer returning as he crossed his arms over his chest. "Big words, Musk," he said. "But words don't mean much out here. Actions do. And so far, you've got nothing." The bikers laughed, their derision echoing through the street. But the crowd, though still wary, seemed to be shifting. A few people exchanged glances, their expressions thoughtful. The teenage boy who had spoken up earlier took another step forward, his eyes filled with determination. "Look at this guy," the leader sneered, addressing both the crowd and his gang as if performing for an audience. "Thinks he's untouchable, standing there like a statue while we're having all the fun. Maybe he needs a little encouragement to join the conversation." The bikers chuckled darkly, their laughter a low, menacing rumble. Scarface, who had been leaning against his motorcycle with a bored expression, straightened up and took a step closer. "You want me to get his attention, boss?" he asked, his tone dripping with malice. The leader pretended to consider it, tapping a finger against his chin. I don't know. What do you think, big guy?" he said, turning to Elon with a mockingly sweet smile. "Should we give you a little push? Help you loosen up?" Elon didn't flinch. He stood firm, his hands loosely at his sides, his gaze steady. The leader's smile faded, replaced by a scowl. "Yeah, I didn't think so," he muttered, his voice low but seething with frustration. Meanwhile, the crowd had grown larger, though most of the townsfolk kept their distance, unsure of what to do. A few brave souls whispered urgently to each other, glancing at their phones as though debating whether to call for help. But the bikers, noticing the movement, turned their attention to the onlookers. "Hey, what's the matter with you people?" one of the bikers barked, his voice sharp and mocking. He was a stocky man with a bald head and a mean-looking scowl. "You standing around to gawk? Or are you waiting for something exciting to happen?" The crowd murmured nervously, a few people taking small steps back. A woman holding a young child clutched him tighter, her eyes wide with fear. The teenage boy who had spoken up earlier stood frozen near the edge of the crowd, his fists clenched at his sides, but his face pale with uncertainty. The leader noticed the boy and let out a low chuckle. "Hey kid," he called, his tone falsely friendly. "Still hanging around? You got something to say? Or are you just hoping someone else will do your talking for you?" The boy hesitated, glancing nervously at the bikers and then at Elon. His courage seemed to waver, but before he could respond, Scarface spoke up, his sneer widening. "Maybe the kid's got a hero complex," he said. "Thinks he's gonna save the day or something. Isn't that cute?" The other bikers laughed, their voices harsh and grating. The boy's face turned bright red, and he took a small step back, his confidence faltering under their taunts. But Elon, noticing the boy's distress, finally spoke. "Leave him out of this," he said, his tone calm but firm. "He's not your target." The leader turned back to Elon, his smirk returning. "Oh, so you do care," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "That's good to know. Means we're getting somewhere." He gestured to Scarface, who stepped closer to Elon, his sneer widening. "What's the plan here, huh?" Scarface said, his voice low and threatening. "You gonna stand there all day and play the strong, silent type? Or are you gonna do something?" Elon didn't respond, his gaze steady. Scarface's sneer faltered slightly, as though the lack of reaction was throwing him off. But he quickly recovered, his expression hardening. "You think you're better than us," he said, his tone filled with venom. "Standing there all calm like nothing can touch you. But everyone's got a breaking point." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small knife, its blade catching the sunlight as he flipped it open with a practiced motion. The crowd gasped, a ripple of fear spreading through the onlookers. The teenage boy's eyes widened, and he took another step back, his face pale. "Hey!" A voice called from the crowd. It was the man who had suggested calling the police earlier, his voice now filled with urgency. "That's enough. Leave him alone." The bikers turned toward the man, their expressions darkening. "Oh, we've got another hero," the leader said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "What is it with this town? Full of people who think they can tell us what to do." "Yeah," Scarface added, his sneer widening. "You want a piece of this too, old man? Or are you just gonna stand there and bark from the sidelines?" The man hesitated, his face flushing red as he realized he had drawn their attention. The leader took a step toward him, his smirk widening. "That's what I thought," he said. "All talk, no action. Just like your buddy here." He gestured toward Elon, who remained calm and unmoving, his gaze unwavering. The leader's smirk faltered slightly, as though he was beginning to feel the weight of Elon's silent defiance. "You think you're making a statement, standing there like that?" the leader said, his voice rising. "You think it makes you look tough? All it does is prove you're too scared to fight back." Elon finally spoke, his tone calm but firm. "I don't need to fight you," he said. "You're doing a fine job of defeating yourselves." The bikers froze, their smirks vanishing as they processed his words. The crowd, though still tense, seemed to draw strength from Elon's response, their whispers growing louder. A few people nodded in agreement, their fear beginning to give way to quiet defiance. The leader's face darkened, his smirk replaced by a scowl. "You think you're funny, don't you?" he snarled. "Think you're some kind of philosopher or something?" "I think words have power," Elon said. "And I think you're afraid of that." The leader's scowl deepened, his fists clenching at his sides. "Afraid," he repeated, his voice low and dangerous. "I don't think you understand who you're dealing with." "Maybe I don't," Elon replied. "But I don't think it matters." The leader's face turned red with anger, and he took another step closer, his posture aggressive. The bikers' bravado hit a fever pitch. Their raucous laughter filled the street, a stark contrast to the nervous murmurs of the crowd that watched from a safe distance. The leader, his face twisted in frustration masked by a smirk, stepped closer to Elon, practically invading his personal space. "You think you're untouchable, don't you?" he hissed, his voice low and dangerous. "Standing there all calm like you've got nothing to lose. But everyone has a breaking point." Elon didn't flinch, his calm gaze meeting the leader's with an unnerving steadiness. His refusal to react only seemed to fuel the leader's anger. Behind him, Scarface and the rest of the bikers circled like vultures, their movements slow and deliberate, their sneers growing more menacing. One of the bikers, the heavy-set man in the leather vest, stomped over to a parked vendor's cart nearby. Without so much as a glance at the elderly woman operating it, he grabbed a small basket of apples and tossed one high into the air before letting it smash to the ground. "Oops," he said with a mock apology, the sneer on his face making it clear he was anything but sorry. "Didn't see that there." The elderly vendor gasped, her wrinkled hands flying to her mouth. "Hey!" she cried out. "That's my livelihood. Leave it alone." The heavy-set biker ignored her, grabbing another apple and tossing it between his hands as he smirked at Elon. "What's the matter, big shot?" he called out. "Not gonna do anything? Or are you just gonna stand there and let this happen?" Elon's gaze flickered toward the woman for a brief moment, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. But he didn't move, his body remaining still as a statue. The leader noticed the subtle reaction and grinned, his teeth bared like a predator sensing weakness. "Oh, I see how it is," the leader said, his voice dripping with mockery. "You don't care about yourself, huh? But when it's someone else, you start to crack. That's good to know." The leader nodded toward the heavy-set biker, who grinned and deliberately knocked the rest of the apple basket to the ground. The fruit scattered across the pavement, rolling into the gutters and under parked cars. The elderly woman let out a cry of dismay, stooping to gather what she could, her frail hands trembling. "Stop it!" a voice called out from the crowd. It was the teenage boy again, his face pale but his eyes blazing with anger. He took a step forward, his fists clenched. "Leave her alone!" Scarface let out a harsh laugh, turning toward the boy with a sneer. "Oh, look, it's the kid again," he said. "Didn't you learn your lesson the first time, huh? Or are you looking to get yourself in trouble?" The boy hesitated, glancing at Elon as though hoping for some sign of support. But Elon remained still, his calm expression unchanging. The lack of reaction seemed to confuse the boy, and he faltered, his courage wavering. "Yeah, that's what I thought," Scarface said, his sneer widening. "All bark, no bite." The leader, meanwhile, returned his attention to Elon, his smirk growing wider. "You're really something, you know that?" he said, his tone filled with mock admiration. "Just standing there, letting all this happen. I thought you were supposed to be smart. Guess I was wrong." Elon didn't respond, his gaze steady. The leader's smirk faltered slightly, as though the lack of reaction was beginning to wear on him. He gestured to the other bikers, his voice rising. "Let's see how long he can keep this up," he said. "Let's see if we can break him." The bikers moved as one, their actions becoming bolder and more destructive. One of them kicked over a small display of flowers outside a boutique, the colorful blooms scattering across the pavement. Another snatched a hat from a man in the crowd and tossed it onto the roof of a nearby building, laughing as the man sputtered in protest. The heavy-set biker, emboldened by the chaos, turned back to the elderly vendor and grabbed a small jar of honey from her cart. "What's this?" he said, holding it up as though inspecting it. "Looks fancy. Bet it costs a fortune." "Put that back," the woman cried, her voice shaking with anger and fear. "That's not yours." The biker ignored her, unscrewing the lid and tilting the jar as though he was about to pour it out. The woman lunged forward, but Scarface stepped in front of her, blocking her path with a sneer. "Easy there, Grandma," he said. "Wouldn't want you to trip and hurt yourself." The woman's face crumpled, her hands shaking as she clutched at her apron. The crowd murmured uneasily, their fear mingled with outrage. But no one stepped forward, their hesitation palpable. Elon's jaw tightened again, the only sign that the biker's actions were beginning to get under his skin. His hands remained at his sides, his posture calm but alert. The leader noticed the subtle shift and grinned, his confidence returning. "Starting to feel it now, huh?" he said, his voice low and taunting. "Starting to realize you're not in control here?" Elon's gaze shifted toward the leader, his expression unreadable. "I was never interested in control," he said quietly. "Only in understanding." The leader barked a laugh, the sound sharp and grating. "Understanding?" he repeated, his tone filled with mockery. "What are you trying to understand, huh? That some people are just better at this than you?" "No," Elon said. "That some people mistake cruelty for strength." The words hung in the air, cutting through the noise like a blade. The leader's smirk faltered, his face darkening with anger. For a moment, the street fell silent, the bikers frozen in place as though unsure how to respond. But then the heavy-set biker, still holding the jar of honey, sneered and tilted it further, letting a thick, golden stream pour out onto the pavement. The elderly vendor let out a cry of dismay, her hands flying to her mouth as she watched the precious liquid go to waste. Elon's eyes flickered toward the spilled honey, his jaw tightening further. The crowd murmured angrily, their whispers growing louder. The teenage boy took another step forward, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. "You don't have to do this," Elon said, his voice calm but firm. "You can stop now." The leader's smirk returned, wider than ever. "Why would we stop?" he said. "We're just getting started." The leader's smirk returned, but it was more forced now, a thin veneer hiding the frustration boiling beneath the surface. He turned to his gang, gesturing widely as though addressing an audience. "Looks like Mr. Genius here doesn't have anything to say after all," he sneered, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. "All those brains, and he can't even figure out how to defend himself." The bikers chuckled, though their laughter sounded strained. Scarface, eager to regain the upper hand, stepped forward again, his sneer widening. "Maybe he's waiting for someone to come save him," he said, his tone mocking. "Think the cops are gonna swoop in and rescue you? Big shot?" Elon met Scarface's gaze, his calm expression unwavering. "I don't need rescuing," he said simply. His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it now, a quiet strength that seemed to unnerve the bikers more than anything else. The leader's smirk faltered for a moment, his eyes narrowing. He took a step closer to Elon, his fists clenched at his sides. "You think you're better than us, don't you?" he snarled, standing there all calm, acting like you've got it all figured out. "You don't know anything about us." Elon tilted his head slightly, his gaze steady. "Maybe I don't," he said, "but I know enough to see what you're trying to do." The leader's face darkened, his smirk vanishing completely. "Oh yeah? And what's that?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. "You're trying to prove something," Elon said. "To me, to this crowd, maybe even to yourselves. But what you're proving isn't what you think it is." The leader's fists tightened, his knuckles turning white. "You don't know what you're talking about," he growled. "You don't know anything about us or why we're here." "Then tell me," Elon said evenly. "What are you trying to prove? What's the point of all this?" The question seemed to catch the leader off guard, his anger momentarily giving way to confusion. He glanced at his gang, as though searching for support, but they avoided his gaze, their confidence starting to waver. The crowd, sensing the shift, grew quieter, their whispers fading into an expectant silence. Scarface, unwilling to let the tension dissipate, stepped forward with a sneer. "You're real good at talking in circles, huh?" he said, his tone mocking. "But all your big words don't mean a thing when it comes down to it. You're just another guy standing in the street, and we're the ones in charge here." He reached into his jacket and pulled out his knife again, flipping it open with a practiced motion. The blade gleamed in the sunlight, a stark reminder of how quickly the situation could turn dangerous. The crowd gasped, a ripple of fear spreading through them. Elon didn't flinch. He didn't move at all, his gaze remaining steady as he watched Scarface approach. The tension in the air was suffocating, every eye in the crowd fixed on the unfolding scene. The leader, sensing an opportunity to regain control, stepped forward and placed a hand on Scarface's shoulder. "Hold on," he said, his tone low but commanding. "No need to get ahead of ourselves." Scarface hesitated, his sneer faltering slightly. "What's the matter, boss?" he asked. "He's just standing there. It's not like he's gonna fight back." The leader didn't respond immediately. His gaze shifted to Elon, his expression unreadable. For a moment, the two men stared at each other, the air between them charged with unspoken tension. Finally, the leader spoke, his voice low and deliberate. "You think you're smart, don't you?" he said. "Think you can just stand there and talk your way out of this?" "I'm not trying to talk my way out of anything," Elon replied. "I'm just wondering how far you're willing to go to prove your point." The leader's smirk returned, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Oh, we're just getting started," he said. He turned to his gang, his voice rising. "Let's show this guy what happens when you mess with us." The bikers moved as one, their actions more deliberate and aggressive now. Scarface grabbed a nearby chair from the outdoor seating area of a cafe and tipped it over, the metal clattering loudly against the pavement. The heavy-set biker returned to the elderly vendor's cart and began rifling through her remaining wares, tossing jars and trinkets onto the ground with a cruel laugh. The leader, meanwhile, focused his attention on the crowd. "What's the matter with you people?" he called out, his voice dripping with disdain. "Just gonna stand there and watch? Or are you gonna do something about it?" The crowd murmured nervously, their fear palpable. The teenage boy who had spoken up earlier took a hesitant step forward, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. But before he could say anything, Scarface turned to him with a sneer. "Hey kid," he said, "didn't we tell you to stay quiet? Or do you need another reminder?" The boy froze, his courage faltering under Scarface's glare. The leader noticed and let out a low chuckle. "That's what I thought," he said. "All talk, no action. Just like this guy." He gestured toward Elon, who remained calm and unshaken. The leader's smirk widened, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, as though he was beginning to realize that no amount of intimidation could break the man standing before him. "You're really something, you know that?" the leader said, his voice rising. "Just standing there, letting all this happen. You think you're making a statement? All you're doing is proving you're too scared to do anything." Elon's gaze didn't waver. "I'm not scared," he said quietly. "I'm just waiting." The leader's smirk faltered, his confidence wavering. "Waiting for what?" he demanded. "For you to realize you're only making this worse for yourselves," Elon said. The words hung in the air, cutting through the noise like a blade. The bikers froze, their actions halting as they processed what he had said. The crowd, though still tense, seemed to draw strength from Elon's calm defiance, their fear beginning to give way to quiet determination. The leader's face darkened, his smirk replaced by a scowl. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" he snarled. "Think you can just stand there and talk your way out of this? But you're not in control here." Elon didn't respond. He didn't need to. His calm, unshaken presence was enough to expose the bikers' cruelty for what it was. Desperation masquerading as power. And though the bikers didn't realize it yet, their time was running out. The weight of Elon's words seemed to settle over the street like a heavy blanket, suffocating the bikers' bravado. The leader's scowl deepened, his jaw tightening as his mind scrambled for a way to regain the upper hand. Around him, his gang began to shift uncomfortably, their laughter and taunts fading into an uneasy silence. The crowd, emboldened by Elon's unshakable demeanor, stood a little taller, their whispers growing louder. For the first time, the bikers looked vulnerable. The leader, sensing the shift in the air, snapped his fingers at Scarface, who still held the knife. "Enough of this," he barked, his voice tinged with desperation. "Teach him a lesson." Scarface hesitated, his sneer faltering. He glanced at Elon, then at the growing crowd. The tension was palpable, and even he could sense that something was off. "Boss, maybe we should back off," he muttered, his voice low. "This is getting out of hand." "Do it," the leader snapped, his eyes blazing with anger. "Show him who's in charge." Scarface's hesitation lasted only a moment before he took a step toward Elon, flipping the knife in his hand with practiced ease. "All right, big shot," he said, his voice cold. "Let's see how calm you really are." The crowd gasped, a ripple of fear spreading through the onlookers. The teenage boy who had spoken up earlier shouted, "Stop! Leave him alone!" But his voice was drowned out by the collective murmur of the crowd. Elon remained still, his calm gaze fixed on Scarface. He didn't flinch, didn't move, as the man closed the distance between them. It was as though he could see straight through the bravado, straight to the uncertainty hidden beneath. Scarface raised the knife, the blade catching the sunlight. The crowd held their breath, frozen in place. But before Scarface could take another step, Elon finally moved. With a speed and precision that caught everyone off guard, Elon stepped forward and grabbed Scarface's wrist, twisting it with a controlled but firm motion. The knife clattered to the ground, and Scarface let out a yelp of pain, stumbling backward. The crowd erupted in gasps and murmurs, their fear giving way to astonishment. The leader's eyes widened, his smirk vanishing entirely. "What the?" he stammered, his bravado crumbling. Elon didn't give them time to recover. He picked up the knife and handed it to a nearby shopkeeper, who looked at him with wide eyes. "Call the police," Elon said calmly, his voice steady and authoritative. The shopkeeper nodded, fumbling with his phone as he stepped back into the safety of his store. The bikers, now visibly shaken, exchanged nervous glances. Their confidence was slipping, and the crowd could see it. The shift in power was palpable, and the onlookers began to murmur with growing excitement. "You think this changes anything?" The leader snarled, his voice shaking with barely concealed rage. "You think you can just waltz in here and make us look bad?" "You've already done that yourself," Elon replied, his tone calm but firm. "I didn't have to do anything." The leader's face turned red, his fists clenching at his sides. "You're gonna regret this," he growled. "You don't know who you're messing with." "Neither do you," Elon said simply. The leader took a step forward, but before he could say another word, the sound of police sirens echoed in the distance. The bikers froze, their bravado crumbling completely. Scarface, still nursing his wrist, muttered, "Boss, we need to get out of here." But the leader didn't move. His pride had taken a hit, and he wasn't ready to back down. "This isn't over," he hissed, glaring at Elon. "You haven't seen the last of us." Elon's gaze didn't waver. "You're free to make your own choices," he said, "but be prepared to face the consequences." The sirens grew louder, and the crowd parted as 2 police cars pulled up to the scene. Officers stepped out, their hands on their holsters as they took in the situation. The elderly vendor, still shaken but resolute, stepped forward and pointed at the bikers. "They've been terrorizing this town for years," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "It's about time someone stood up to them." The officers nodded, moving toward the bikers. The gang, now thoroughly cowed, didn't resist as the police began to question them. The leader, his face a mask of fury and humiliation, shot one last glare at Elon before allowing himself to be led away. The crowd erupted into cheers, their fear replaced by relief and gratitude. The teenage boy who had spoken up earlier rushed forward, his face glowing with admiration. "That was amazing," he said, his voice filled with awe. "You stood up to them like it was nothing." Elon turned to the boy, a small smile breaking through his calm demeanor. "Sometimes the best way to stand up to a bully is to show them they can't intimidate you," he said. "But it's important to pick your battles wisely." The boy nodded, his admiration only growing. Around them, the townsfolk began to gather, their expressions filled with gratitude. The elderly vendor approached, her hands still trembling as she held out a small jar of honey. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what we would have done without you." Elon accepted the jar with a nod, his smile warm but understated. "You're welcome," he said, "but this wasn't just about me. It was about all of you standing together." The crowd murmured in agreement, their spirits lifted by his words. The tension that had gripped the street was gone, replaced by a sense of unity and hope. The bikers were gone, their reign of intimidation brought to an end, and the town was finally free to breathe again. Have you ever witnessed a moment when someone stood up for what was right, even when the odds seemed impossible? Elon Musk's calm defiance against the bikers today wasn't just about confronting cruelty. It was about showing that courage and integrity have the power to dismantle even the strongest facade of intimidation. His refusal to retaliate with the same cruelty they dished out sent a message. True strength lies in restraint, intelligence, and compassion. If this story resonated with you, think about how often we let fear or hesitation stop us from stepping up. What if we all stood as unwavering as Elon did? What if we all spoke up for the vulnerable, challenged the bullies, and showed that kindness can be stronger than aggression? It's a powerful reminder that even one person's actions can inspire an entire community. Now, let me ask you, what would you have done in Elon's shoes? Would you have stayed calm under pressure, or would you have taken a different approach? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear how you'd handle a situation like this. And before you go, don't forget to like this video if you believe in standing up against injustice. Subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Together, we can share lessons that remind us of the power of courage, unity, and doing what's right, no matter how daunting the challenge may seem.